Hello, Greenhouse Science, and welcome. This is the first lecture in the series in this class. We're going to review some basic concepts from your regular biology class that you probably have already learned, but it should be a really quick review for you. We're going to tailor it a little bit more on the discussion of plants, as this class, that is the big goal here, is we're going to be looking at plants, and we're going to be uh, not only just looking at them, but we're also going to be studying them, their evolution, their ecology, all of these really basic biology terms, and I just want to make sure we're all on the same page moving into it. So, first off, we have to talk about what is biology. Remember that biology is the study of life. It offers an organized framework for asking questions about the natural world, from our little tiny organisms all the way up to our big blue whales, and in the plant sense, from our algae and our phytoplankton all the way up to our trees and our sequoias and our pine trees and our conifers and all those really big, majestic structures that they make. So, when we talked about the characteristics of life for biology, these are all also true for plants. So all plants have to have some organization. All plants have presence of cells. They respond to stimuli. They have homeostasis. They're able to keep their bodies inside of a normal range. They have metabolism where they're able to make and break molecules. They're able to grow and reproduce, and they're able to change throughout time. So the first thing here is organization. This is that high degree of order within all organisms, internal and external parts, and how it interacts with the outside world. A tree is only a tree. A tree looks like a tree because it has this organization. It has bark and stems and leaves and roots, things that you're used to seeing. In the example here, I use an owl. An owl is a great example for an animal, but plants are the same thing. Like rocks might have shape, but it's not consistently. All granite's not all the same, um, but all trees will be the same. All lilies will be the same. All daffodils will be the same in the same species anyway. The next thing is that they all have cells, and that the cell is the smallest unit that can perform all life's processes. Some examples of this: bacteria can be one cell and still be alive. Plants can have very little cells and still be alive. If they're unicellular, something is unicellular, it is only one cell. If it's any more than that, it's multicellular. And more cells means usually more complexity. It means you have things, the ability to make flowers and roots and stems and leaves. So things like water lilies and trees and all those things, the grasses are all multicellular. This multicellular in this organization goes up bigger. You go from your big things like your organisms. They are made up of organ systems. Those organ systems are made up of organs. Those organs are made up of tissues, et cetera, on down. An organ system, this is a group of parts that carry out a specific function. For a plant, it might be the xylem and phloem. They carry water to and from in the plants. For the organs, it is a structure inside of an organ system that has a specific job. So an organ might be a root for a plant. And then for tissues, all organs are made up of tissues which have similar ability. It might be vascular tissue and ground tissue in plants versus like circulatory and connective tissue in animals. Going down even further, you get into cells, which make up tissue. A whole bunch of cells come together to make tissues. Cells have to be membrane covered, can contain all genetic information for replication, and carry out cellular functions. So one plant cell is an example here. Inside of that, we have organelles, which are these tiny structures. They need to carry out their functions. It contains biological compounds, and then those biological compounds are made up of even smaller atoms, which is the simplest part of an element, and they help to make up molecules. So iron is used in hemoglobin, carbon is used in chlorophyll, and so all of these things together make up and build upon each other to create larger structures. All organisms have to be able to respond to stimuli. And this is any physical or chemical change in the internal or external environment. For us, our pupils dilate to keep the light level entering your eye constant. But for plants, this might be something like growing towards the light. It might be something like growing down in response to gravity. It might be something like the daylight hours are getting longer, so I'm going to drop my leaves so that I can save energy going into the winter. And organisms have to respond to stimuli to stay alive. If they don't respond to stimuli, they will die and won't continue on. The next thing is homeostasis. This is the maintenance of a stable level of internal conditions, even though the environmental conditions are constantly changing. This plant here is not in homeostasis. Homeostasis would be a normal, healthy plant. This guy is wilting. So normally what they would do is they would, pull up more water from their roots. This guy is not living in a natural environment. He doesn't have access to that. He has to be watered. So any kind of regulatory system for temperature, water, nutrients is part of homeostasis. Your body does lots of different ways to know homeostasis, but plants also do this process. The next is metabolism. This is the sum of all chemical reactions that take in and transform energy and materials from the environment. So for our plants, they use sun to generate sugar molecules through photosynthesis. They pull up their nutrients from the soil and build them into biomolecules. For animals, they consume other animals for energy, and then they use those animals that energy to escape or capture prey or reproduce or grow. All of those good things. Growth and development is our next thing here. All living things have to grow and increase in size. Um, this growth has to be organized, though. Things like crystals and icicles grow, but they're accumulating the same stuff. They're not any kind of development. So cell division, we get one cell into two cells. Those continue to grow. We get differentiation, where those cells get jobs, and then we get what's called cell development. And this is the process by which an organism is becoming an adult, where the cells are differentiating and specializing. So in a tree or a flowering plant, this is going to be, they're going to grow a flower, and then they're going to grow seeds, and then those seeds are going to grow and plant and develop on their own. The last thing is reproduction and changing throughout time. All organisms need to produce organisms like themselves to continue their species. So one organism itself does not have to reproduce, but some organisms in a species have to reproduce or that species goes extinct. This reproduction is transmitting hereditary information to their offspring in the molecule DNA, which if you remember from biology is deoxyribonucleic acid. A short trait segment of DNA that has the instructions for a single trait, is called a gene. So this guy here is doing a lot of reproduction. There's lots of babies coming off of this thing that are ready then to continue the species. There's two kinds of reproduction. There's sexual reproduction and asexual reproduction. Spider plants are awesome. That's what this guy is. He does both. And it can either require two organisms where you have to combine hereditary information from one plant and a different plant. This would be like flowers. Anytime you have a flowering thing, flowers. And then on the asexual side of things, this only requires one organism, and there's no new hereditary information. It's just a clone. So all of these little babies are clones of their parents. So there's some upsides and downsides to both of these, and we'll talk about those more in this semester. Diversity of life. We use the tree of life to classify organisms based on similar characteristics. We have a single common ancestor, which was somewhere here in the beginning there, and we believe that all life came from this single common ancestor. We have three domains of life. We have bacteria, we have archaea, and we have eukarya. We'll talk about each of those, but those are our three branches of our tree. Inside of eukarya, we have some extra kingdoms that occur. We have animalia, we have plantae, we have fungi, and we have protista. And all of these we'll talk about a little bit earlier in detail, but the one we're really going to drill down on and focus on is that kingdom Plantae. So there's one phylum in domain bacteria, and then they have, one kingdom in there. That's kingdom bacteria. This is the cholera bacterium. They get you really sick. And then there's one kingdom in domain archaea called the archaeans. And these are more like your extremophiles, your halophiles that like a lot of salt, your thermophiles that like a lot of temperature and can survive in those really harsh environments. Ecology, this is a branch of biology that studies organisms interacting with and each other and the environment. We can't talk about plants and not talk about ecology. They are a huge part of ecology. They're also a huge part of ecosystems, and a lot of ecosystems are named or uh, classified by what kind of plant matter lives on these. But these are communities of living species and their physical environments. Next up is evolution. This is we're going to talk about populations changing through time. We're going to talk about how do we get from here to here. How do we get from an algae species to a plant species? We're going to talk about that process through which inherited characteristics within populations change and how all the branches of the tree of life are related to each other. We'll talk about natural selection, which is that some organisms have favorable traits that improve their abilities to survive and reproduce. You can see that both of these rabbit species have traits that they have developed not over their lifetime, but over their species lifetimes that have made them better suited for whatever environment they're in. This guy has bigger ears so that he can let off more heat and be able to survive that really hot climate. This guy has shorter ears and a bit more fur so that he's able to survive in the colder environments and hold in more heat. So they have the same structures, but a little bit different jobs based on where they live. The scientific method is something that we'll talk about and use in this class. It's an organized approach for answering questions. For it to happen, you have to have two things. A, events in the natural world have to have causes. They don't just happen randomly. And then two, that those fundamental laws of nature operate at the same way at all places and all times. So you could grow a plant, you could grow a radish, as long as everything was contained. You could grow it here on Earth the same as you could grow it on Mars, the same as you could grow it on the moon, the same as you could grow it in a spaceship, as long as you kept all the conditions that allow it to grow the same. So scientific method, you've seen it before. We're going to see it again just in case. Just do a little refresher here. But the first is observation or asking a question, kind of the same thing there. You say, hey, what's going on here? And has it been talked about before? So that's that second part there, which is doing that background research, making sure that somebody hasn't already studied that, or if they have, great, you can learn from them and then ask new questions. Once you've done that, you can construct your hypothesis, which is your proposed explanation for why something in the natural world works the way that it does. So it doesn't have to be the answer, but it's a supposal. Why does it work that way? Then you make a prediction, which is some kind of statement that forecasts what would happen if your hypothesis were true. You run an experiment, you analyze the data, and then you report that data so that other scientists can peer review that data and then use it to continue to further science education and science theory. So when we do experiments, you want a controlled experiment where you have an experimental group and a control group. The control group provides a normal standard. This is like if you, the scientist, didn't interfere, what would happen in this experiment is your control. Your experimental group, however, you get to change something. You change one factor. And in this case, we call this the independent variable. In this example here, it's fertilizer is your independent variable. This is the thing that can be manipulated. So you could manipulate light, you could manipulate fertilizer, you can manipulate the soil, you can manipulate the water that you give, the temperature. All of those are the things that you, the scientist, can manipulate and then see how it affects the plant. The dependent variable, also called the responding variable, is one that's affected by the independent variable. So on that example before, using fertilizer gave more flowers, so it affected or was dependent on, the results were dependent on how much fertilizer you gave to that plant. Collection of data, most experiments measure a variable, that's the dependent variable. And we try to do quantitative data, data that can be measured by the numbers. And then the analyzing part of this is to determine if data is accurate, reproducible, and of value to science. So once you've got your data, you can start drawing conclusion. Is your hypothesis supported? Remember that we can't prove hypotheses. We can only support them or disprove them. If your experiment works and everything goes like you were planning and it was what you expected, you say that your hypothesis was supported. You don't say that it was proven. Then you apply the results. You can create models, things to help you represent or describe the things that you've been experimenting on. This really famous one by Watson and Crick here. This is the DNA molecules here with cardboard balls and wire bars. Posters are a great model. Um, like graphs can be a good model, pie charts, things like that. Just anything to help you explain the results of the experiment and pass that information on. And then the last part is communicating. We share our results as scientists so that other scientists can learn, ask new questions, and continue that pathway towards just knowing more. So the best way to do this is publishing a paper. This paper will be peer reviewed is the best way to do it, where experts in the field anonymously read and critique your paper, and then they determine if it can be replicated, if it's good science, if your if your statistical analysis lines up. All of those things happen in the peer review. This is the end of our first chapter here, our first segment. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, let me know, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.